I think enough people have joined, so maybe we can start with this webinar. Just in case you don't know me, let me introduce myself. I'm Vikas Jha. I'm an assistant vice president at GreyB. It's a technology consulting firm, and very recently we have started consulting in the cannabis space. So it's been 1.5 years, and during that time, I have helped 6 people in securing investment from VCs. I've helped large corporations decide on the type of drinks, cannabis-infused drinks that they are planning for future. I have helped another startup with deciding what kind of products they are going to move ahead with. And a well-established CBD player from Canada wanted to know what are the geographical expansion strategies that they can utilize, and we provided them an analysis that helped them to decide which would be the next best location for them to expand. So I decided to take this webinar because I saw a common underlying problem, and in fact, 2 common underlying problems. One was that they had a problem, but they did not know what is the best way to solve that. And one of the things that we do here at GreyB is solve those problems in an objective manner through our analysis. The second problem was fear, that a lot of people actually reached out to us saying that this is a good time to be in the cannabis space, but they had some fear related to the taboos associated with cannabis in general. Now, I said to them what I always say to a lot of people I meet, that nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. And that's very relevant to the cannabis space. And so this webinar is not going to be a pure show and tell. I do have slides that I will flash when I'm talking about certain things. But the whole structure of the webinar is designed in a manner that it's more interactive. We can ask questions. You'll get you'll get the answers to those in the middle of the webinar. Of course, we'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end, and we can take up those questions at the end. So let's start with what I want to say here. And a lot of times when I have been consulting people in the cannabis space, what I have seen is that there is a lot of publicly available information that can be used to arrive at directions on where to take the next steps. So for example, many people were asking me that, is cannabis-infused drinks a good market to go ahead at this time? Now, the type of research that entails to answer this question is related to finding out, are there any existing products out there? Are there bigger companies who are taking interest in this domain? What's the POS data for some of the products that are on shelf right now? Can we find those? Can we extrapolate them to find out answers that can help them to move ahead with a decision? Now, many of these data points are publicly available information, and I'll show you charts and graphs that we have prepared based on that. Of course, when we are conducting analysis, it also has various other components like primary research, some amount of secondary research, some paid databases. But the feeling that I have is that the publicly available information can always give you the first step or an overview based on which you can decide whether you want to go for more analysis or a targeted mapping of the market and the products. So we will in this webinar talk about the overall state of the cannabis industry in general. What are the effects of the legalization? Is it expanding as expected, or are there still hesitations? Are big players actually trying to enter it? And more often, there are questions where somebody actually wants to collaborate with somebody. So how do we find collaborations or partners when we are trying to enter this space? Of course, there might be other questions that may come up during the webinar, and I'll answer those. So let's start by looking at the overall state of the cannabis and see how it takes us. By the way, just to introduce one of my other co-hosts, I have Gaurav Sharma with me, and from the past 1.5 years that we have been working on analytics in this space, Gaurav has been a major contributor to the campaign. He has been one of the guys who has developed content for us to let people know that we provide analytics here, and the analytics that they themselves can do at their own desk to arrive at decisions. So he's with me, he's right here with me in the office, and he'll be answering some of the questions as and when they come. So I have a few slides that I want to let's just hang out there on the screen, and then when I start presenting, maybe we can talk about what the information content is and what is the context of that information. So let's go to the outline of the discussion that we are planning today. So one of the things that we want to talk about is what is the potential in the cannabis market. Everybody knows that post legalization in California and in Canada, there has been an upshot in the interest and activities of players trying to enter this domain, players trying to secure their footing in this space. Has it really happened? The answer is yes. And we have stats when we were doing analytics to show that this is indeed one of the blooming domains to be in right now at this point of time. So this is how the presentation is structured, or the webinar is structured. We'll start with the cannabis sector. We will also look at people who are trying to secure investments and what kind of information do they need to understand which are the VCs to whom they can go to, because there is a trend that they have been supporting startups like them. We'll also look at some of the collaborations or the M&A activities of bigger players trying to enter this domain by partnering up with startups or players who are specifically into the cannabis space. Of course, these would include alcohol or beverages company who are actually already having a significant base in the market, and they want to introduce a new drink to ride the cannabis revolution so that they are not lagging behind. We will also look at analytics that may help in geographical expansion to some of the players who are trying to expand their portfolio into different geographies. Recently, we have seen that apart from USA and Canada in North America, even Europe is tilting towards legalization, at least for the medical purposes. And are there any other countries, maybe in Asia or Europe, which might be a good destination to start with a new venture? So we said that marijuana is a blooming domain. What I'm trying to support it is with fact, and we can see that the projections that we are having right now says a lot about the revenue potential that is there. If you can see my screen, that shows that recreational is having a lot of potential since legalization in Canada and in US, specifically in California. And we can see that by 2025, it's comparable to the medical wing of cannabis. So that's a plus point, that's a high for us. One of the things that we actually saw was a steep rise in the cannabis infused product, whether it is on the edible side or whether it is on the beverages side. And you can see some well-known names like Pernod Ricard and Coors, and of course there is Constellation. So these are already huge players with humongous customer base for their alcohol-based drinks. And now they want to actually enter into this domain. And in fact, they have already started taking steps towards this direction. Now, the screen that you see right now that I have shared, it lists some names. It also gives some profit margin or percentages that shows that cannabis-infused products is something that is having the most potential in the cannabis space. Now, this is a graph that we prepared from, again, publicly available information sources, from experts writing their opinion, from research that has already been done. Why reinvent the wheel when you can take up the data and then support it again with your own analysis to give out insight? So these are the type of insights that are very easily available on publicly available sources. And that also gives you an idea as to the interest of big players supports a hypothesis that this is going to be a growing domain. We see that second to the cannabis-infused products is the pharmaceutical drugs. Now, everybody knew that big pharma is going to enter into medicines based on CBD and THC, or medicines in general based on the entourage effect. We see that as a fact when we look at the projections for pharmaceutical drugs. But the third one is wine and spirits, and a close follower is beer and ale. Now, this is something that shows that the fear of entering into the cannabis space and to feel the backlash of public just because it had been a taboo since the last 30 to 40 years is not there anymore. People are becoming upfront. Even big players are trying to enter this. So that's a positive point for anybody who is actually trying to enter into this domain based on their products in the beer category or in the wine category or in general an alcohol-based product which is replaced by a cannabis-based product. There were some speculation whether cigarette companies are going to face a downfall after cannabis-based products are sent into the market. And one of the things that we saw is that there was some fear, and even big players like Altria are actually trying to make THC-based products that they can sell in the market. So now, again, the point here that I want to share with all of you is that people are actually trying to enter this domain, and you can very easily find these type of insights based on publicly available sources, whether it is blogs, whether it is expert opinions that are posted, or whether it is by looking at the activities of big players in their forward-looking statements. So many of the insights that you see here related to Pernod Ricard trying to enter or partner up in this domain, or Constellation Brands trying to enter into this domain, is from their annual reports. And that's a good way to actually start and then see what bigger players are doing, and if it is possible for smaller players also to study their strategies and maybe figure out their own. Specifically talking about cannabis-infused drinks, we actually looked at some of the other market reports that were available. One of them is ArcView, and we saw that in California alone, there is a potential for $180 million. Now that's a huge number considering that the legalization in California just happened a few months ago. So it is promising. It shows a spike, and these are figures readily available on the internet for public. So this is for those guys who actually want to first test the market by studying the current insights and then only put a foot into the door. So there are easily available information that they can look at, something like this. Then another point that I observed when I was talking to a lot of clients and then counseling them on their businesses was that people from parallel industries are actually trying to enter into this. They want to take a part of the pie, and some of them are actually food and beverage that we have already talked about, that there are a lot of edibles, something like the gummy bears that people are trying to enter into. Nutraceuticals is something that is again a very big industry right now, and nutraceuticals based on CBD or cannabis is something that is looking to expand in a lot of geographies, especially in geographies like Japan, where nutraceuticals has a lot of utilization, and the type of population or the demographic that Japan has, nutraceuticals has a lot of scope there. And interesting technology that we saw in the application of cannabis, or rather hemp, is in the building materials. Cosmetics, of course, it was expected. Medicinal industry, it was of course expected that cannabis will play a big role in those industries. So this is something that we found out, that these are the major application areas for cannabis related products, and some of them were surprising. Now this is again something that we found out using publicly available information. It's a matter of typing in a few keywords on Google or going to websites or experts or forums or discussion groups that are actually talking about developments here. So you may be surprised what kind of information you may find there. And since when I was talking to a lot of clients, and I understood that more often than not, people who have ideas, they are first looking for potential of investment from VCs, and they want to understand in general if actually people are interested, investors are interested in funding companies like them who have an idea, who have a good basis for a product, future product that they have developed, and whether there are people who can fund them. So One of the ways in which this question can be answered is actually to try and look at the recent fundings, the recent collaboration, the recent participation of giants in the market with startups, with smaller or medium players, even with individuals. And some of the companies that we saw who are actually participating in this are Constellation Brand, as I mentioned, Budweiser, and Altria in the smoking space. So these are all companies who have actually tried to gain a pathway into the cannabis space by collaborating or funding or providing support, both from a management perspective, from an expansion perspective, from a product realization perspective, to smaller players, and thus gaining some market share with these small and medium-sized players. Again, this is an information that we found just by looking at the future-looking statements of Altria or Constellation. Along with that, a lot of players who are actually providing support to the cannabis industry in general are popping up everywhere in Canada as well as in USA. Some of the companies have actually become big, and they are now, some of them are actually publicly listed on stock exchanges. But the major categories in which we saw industries popping up were in the analytics space, majorly in the compliance space, because there is still a bit of a lack of synchronization between the federal level regulations dictating cannabis trade, selling, and payments, and the state level. So there are a lot of companies who are actually trying to solve that problem, and we see that companies like FlowHub or Cultivera, these are people who have made a name for themselves in compliance or payments related space. In fact, many of them are actually using very advanced technologies who have just gained traction in the market, such as blockchain, to actually devise painless payment systems. They are using data analytics to understand how resources can be spread for players who are trying to sell through shelves. Of course, there are e-commerce companies also, or marketplaces where marijuana can be sold. So we have seen an influx there also, and there are some very well-known companies like Ease and LeafLink who are actually into this space. In fact, one of the interesting things that I observed was that people are actually trying to make accessories or auxiliary equipments that are used to consume marijuana, such as devices for inhaling, such as pipes, and they are using technologies like 3D printing to achieve this. So those are also a rise in the parallel industry in the cannabis space. So that's very easily figurable for anybody who is trying to develop such a solution, to see who are the competitors, what are they doing, what stage of product launch are they at right now, and are they filing or protecting their innovation. So that's a very important part that a lot of people miss, that when you are looking at a technology, it is not simply the functioning of the technology that you look at, but also the intellectual property protecting it that you have to keep in mind. In the past few days, I got a request from one of the startups who has actually made a name for itself in US, and then they had a list of 20 products that they were looking at for production in the next 18 months, and they wanted to understand which are the top 5 products that they can actually take into production. Now, one of the things that they were missing was that who had the rights to these products. Are these products very common, not protected by somebody who is an individual entity or a company, or are these products something that people are filing patents for, filing copyrights or trademarks for? So that's an essential part of a technology analysis, and that should be considered. And when we were suggesting solutions there, one of the first things that we did was try to analyze what type of patents are being filed and which aspects of the inventions or products are they protecting. So that's an important point to know. And again, this information is also available on sources like Google Patents, where you can run your own queries, find out the patents, look at them, and see what they're trying to disclose. Although patent language is a bit tedious to understand in the first reading, but I think having those information available in the public domain is a great help for people who are trying to secure a position in the cannabis industry. And one of the prominent questions that came to us were on the collaboration front, where teams of 2 to 3 people who were actually trying to start their own companies wanted to understand how they can collaborate. One way to answer that question is to actually look at other players who have collaborated. And one of the companies that we looked at was Vipova, and they have developed a technology there. And there is another company, Province Brands. They are also actually going into this. Another one is Trade Biosciences, all in different domains. But how are they consolidating or comparing themselves or collaborating with people is by taking help of bigger players. For example, Aurora has already made a name in the cannabis space, and Alcana is one of the biggest providers of retail in Canada, and then they have come together to secure business in this space. Similarly, Constellation is actually working with Canopy Growth. Now, Canopy Growth is also one of the top performing companies and one of the big names in the cannabis industry. But you see that bigger companies are collaborating with them. Similarly, Tilray is a well-known name. It has been, I think, 4 to 5 years since they actually came into the industry or started here. They are, after 4 to 5 years, in a position where they can collaborate with companies like Budweiser. Course is another name who is actually trying to enter this space. So there are a lot of M&A activities, and there are a lot of collaborations that are going on. This is a positive point for any potential participants who want to secure a position in this industry. So the learning here that I would like to share with you is that anytime you are looking for partners, try to understand who else are already partnering up in the industry and see what was the basis of them partnering up. And this is an information very easily available on their own websites. Another example of Altria tagging up along with Kronos is in the smoking space. They are actually trying to secure a 45% stake in the Kronos group. So that's another hint on how major big tobacco players are trying to enter this space. But let's come to the previous question that we had picked up, and that was about companies taking investments from bigger players. So one of the things that we learned when we were looking at FlowHub's investment is that companies like HP are actually supporting and taking a market share with FlowHub by providing software expertise for legal cannabis. So, and this is a fairly recent event in 2018. Similarly, FlowHub and Massroots are also working together. These are two companies who have started at very similar time, have risen in very similar manner, and are now collaborating to create dispensaries in the cannabis space. If we look at the funding, we can look at the two series that happened with FlowHub, and we can see the amount, the specific amount that was given to them as funding to start different ventures. And then who are the players who are actually funding these companies. So that's an interesting point to start at who can be your potential funders. If you can see that companies like yours or startups like yours have been funded by somebody for, say, 4 rounds or 5 rounds, and then you can understand the pattern in which the funding is done. So I see I have a question, and okay. So the question I here have is, what are the strategies to provide ideas on geographical expansion? And maybe I can take that up before I proceed. So usually when I look at the CBD space, I majorly see its application in nutraceuticals as well as in the pharmaceutical space. If we want to expand in the nutraceutical space, we want to look at demography of different countries. We want to look at the friendliness of marijuana legalization in those countries and the support from the government that is being provided. So those are the 3 factors that I would start with. Of course, the consumer base, the age group of the consumer base, already existing products which can be replaced with CBD related products. These are some of the other factors that I would be considering. And what kind of data can we show there? Maybe I can skip to one of the future slides where we can actually look at, and then this is an interesting way for looking on geographical expansion capabilities. So one of the ways in which we tried to do that was actually look at studies that showed the potential for application of nutraceuticals and pharmaceutical based on CBD. And what we saw was that there were some very common ailments that were present in Japan and there were people who were trying to solve this problem through CBD. So we looked at the technological perspective. That's what you see on the IP for treatment of diseases by CBD. So we saw that a lot of people are actually filing patents related to using CBD for easing up anxiety. So that gives me an idea that people are interested in this domain. There is a common problem that they are trying to solve, and it has not been solved very easily using the traditional methods. So there is a scope for CBD. Similarly, I looked at some of the other common stats, and then these are already available at the Japanese government website, so it can be easily picked up. And what we saw was that the application of CBD to some of the conditions and the people who are suffering from that. So that gives me one idea that what is the population and what is the ratio of the population who can be potential consumers. And based on that and comparing it with other geographies following a similar process, looking at the publicly available government data and the patent data, trying to find out a correlation, which geography is better than the other to expand for CBD-based product. So I hope this gives you at least a first level answer on the question that was asked. Okay. Oh, I see another question. So let me answer that also. The question is that I'm planning to start a marijuana cultivation business. How should we go about it? Okay. So, and I have had a similar situation with one of my earlier clients. And then this was somebody who had real estate in a couple of states in the US, and they wanted to understand how to go about the cultivation business of marijuana. So one of the first things that is required is license. And the second thing is investment. So the problem can be broken down into two parts. One is securing licenses. So if you look at the geographies or the states where you are looking to start your cultivation, first of all, you need to check if legalization is there for recreational as well as medical purposes. Decide where you want to go with respect to the end application or the distribution of the cultivated marijuana, and then looked at the available licenses that are there. And if you have enough upfront sheet cash to get those, secure those licenses. Because what I have observed working with a lot of VCs who were actually assessing certain companies, whether they want to fund them for cultivation business or not, was the ease with which they acquired the licenses and the future plan that they have to expand and to cultivate. One of the best practices was to actually hire an expert in cultivation so that the VCs have a confidence that there is a knowledgeable person who is actually participating in the whole process. So first step, to understand if licenses are available in the geography of your interest in an easy manner or not, and how much seed cash will it require. Second, preparing a business plan where of course we can help, or you can take help from already prepared business plan available in plenty on websites. So you can start preparing your plan, you can start outlining your production process, you can start looking at what phases you will require and the investments in and how you are going to spend it. As long as you have this plan and it is accompanied by a 4 to 5 slide deck showing the advantages of your production process, I think this should be enough arsenal to go to a VC and start the conversation. So that's how I would suggest my clients to go about looking at cultivation businesses. I'm going to come back to the portions that I was starting with, and one of the things, one of the players to be admired in this domain is Canopy Growth. They have a good market cap. They started at the right time, and they have a very good diversification strategy. In cases, they're trying to own the value chain. So for example, in the medical space, either they have their own in-house grown brands or they are collaborating with people who have an established market in the value chain. So they are into medical sector also, they are into affiliate, value added, or customer access. And you can see the brands that they are working with or they have launched in their growth strategy. So that's a good way to be. In fact, for Canopy Growth and Aurora, what we have seen is that they are investing into mergers and acquisition so that they don't have to go through the cycle of starting a business from scratch and then achieving the market share. They're simply investing into growing the businesses that are already on a steep trend towards growth, and then they are helping them to grow more, and in turn getting benefits by holding a stake in those companies. So that's also a good strategy that requires investment, that requires a deep pocket. Canopy Growth has both, and then so they are using this stack. But it's also as easily applicable for a new person or a small or a medium-sized company to actually talk to these companies and place their products in the value chain that Canopy Growth might be trying to leverage. Again, I mean, this slide shows brands related to Canopy Growth. We have looked at players from a competitive strategy domain. We have looked at players from a collaboration perspective. We have also had inbound requests where they wanted to understand if there are universities or research institutes who have significant technology that can help them give them a quick launch into the domain without going through the tedious R&D cycle. And we have found answers and examples in all these cases just by using or leveraging the publicly available information sources. And maybe I can give examples of some of those. So for example, we were looking at synthetic opioids being used in pharmaceuticals, and one of the top players in the pharma domain, they wanted to understand that because they wanted to work on the synthetic opioids. What we found out was that Stanford, Princeton, and a couple of other institutes were already working in this, and they had already achieved a significant progress in doing that, in using different platforms to provide synthetic opioids or cannabinoids. So, and we were also able to correlate the patents that they had filed to secure these inventions. Now, this was a good arsenal to go back to the requester and tell them that, hey, look, these are the universities who are working in this. These are the technologies that they're working on, or the base technologies that they're working on, and they also have patents. So this might be a good candidate to go for collaboration, and that's what they did. So that's a good idea to go ahead with. A lot of people actually who came to us wanted to be acquired at an early stage. And one of the things that they asked us that what should we do to get acquired easily? Again, this calls for studying of companies who have been acquired, who have been merged, and try to understand which players have a strategy that aligns with acquisition or mergers. It's a very easy information to find, although it might be that all the information that you get are on scattered places. For example, some of them are on stock exchange sites or finance sites that actually give you these type of information. Some of the information is actually in the annual statement. Some of these are actually in disclaimer. There was an interesting case where we actually found out that in the disclaimer there was mentioned a point that the risks associated with mergers and acquisition for a company it is to be let known to the shareholders. And from there we backtracked. Are they actually doing a lot of mergers and acquisition? And we found out that they have been silently acquiring a lot of very small players who are working in a very similar technology that they are, to either assimilate them or to reduce competition. So those are type of hints that you can directly get from publicly available information. Now, so in a nutshell, what we are trying to say here is that there needs, or analytics will always lead into the right engagement. And analytics is not a tough task to do. It is based on publicly available information. It can be very easily done. And there are places where you can actually get ready-made information that you can use to plan out your next step. And that can be done using publicly available information sources. Yeah, maybe Gaurav, I think you received some question that maybe we can answer here.
Yeah, because I have a few questions with me. So one of the question is, and it is from Aaron. So who could be the suitable candidate for collaboration if we are looking for collaboration related to cannabis beverages? I would like to answer this question, Vikas.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so in this slide, we have provided top contenders for collaboration. So while picking while selecting a contender for collaboration, you can look at the technology they are offering. For example, in this case, Tourette Biosciences has developed a solution which uses nanoemulsification to reduce the onset time of cannabis beverages. So in this case, they are using nanoemulsification. So we can see for other companies also, like Vipova, it has filed a patent related to Dehydratech, which again reduces the onset time of cannabis beverages. So such kind of partners can help you in with better products and with better technology to back your products.
Good. I think that's a great answer. Gaurav, are there any other questions that we can field today? Because I think we have a few minutes in which we can take up these questions.
So I have another question from Kevin. So he's asking that, as you mentioned 3D printing, are there any companies which are using blockchain or any similar techs to secure their payment or anything of that sort?
Yeah, I think there are. I have seen a couple, but if you remember, you want to talk about those companies?
So
I remember a company who was actually trying to make a vaporizer. I think it was known as 3D Bowl. Who was trying to make a vaporizer by manufacturing parts using 3D printing, and one of their value propositions was, I remember now, the company's name was Print Bowl, and it's a Seattle-based company, and they have, I think, begun in 2015, and they produce parts of vaporizer that can be very easily assembled together to use it for inhalation of cannabis-related products. So I think we have a few contenders there in the 3D printing space. Maybe we can field 2 to 3 more questions before we conclude for the day.
So we have another question, like you mentioned cannabis dosing or microdosing in nutraceuticals, right? So why do they feel a need to microdose such kind of products?
Okay. So maybe I can attempt to answer this question and you can add on to it if you want to. So one of the things that I saw was that people are afraid of the high effect of the THC if the THC content is more. And one of the things that I have seen microdosing solve is that if you put the THC content or the THC percentage in a low amount in products, say for example in tea, herbal teas, that creates a lot of solutions such as killing anxiety, killing fear, bringing up confidence, and it does not also give you a high feeling. So there is no fear that you're going to be out of control when you drink those beverages, and since it is microdosed, so the effects are there in a controlled manner. So that's my 2 cents on why people are going for microdosing. But another aspect of microdosing is that it is very usable in the pharmaceutical domain. Trace amounts of THC or cannabinoids in medicines can be very effective in killing common disorders or common experiences of people without making them high, of course. So pharmaceutical industry, I think, is a big application area for microdosing right now.
Okay. So to add on to what Vikas said, so microdosing industry, as I've seen some trends, like microdosing industry is booming right now. Most of the companies are trying to get their feet into this industry, and as we have mentioned in this presentation also, like companies from nutraceuticals, life sciences and cosmetics, and like food and beverages, they are all trying to get their feet into this domain, and they just want to make a product which reaches to the vast audience. And microdosing is, you can say they are using microdosing as a tool to reach to the vaster audience and make their product mainstream.
I think that's one way to look at it. Cool. Do we have any more questions before we conclude for today? But in any case, I see a question, and that seems to be very interesting as to how artificial intelligence is employed in the cannabis domain. Okay. In fact, I mean, artificial intelligence is actually used a lot of times in selecting the right combinations to produce the seed for genetically modified cannabis and to yield, or rather to produce high yield plants for cannabis. So there are a lot of data that are being analyzed, and AI algorithms are being used to find out that strain that can actually yield high volumes of THC. in less space. So I have seen AI being used there. I have also seen AI being used in a lot of data analytics to find out the type of ideal audiences through point of sale data based on geographies, states, and using that data or the insights to put cleverly positioned advertisements. So that's something that I have seen AI being used there. Okay, I see another question that if we have to reduce the amount of THC, CBD in our products, can GreyB be of help? Can you find such information for us? Yes, GreyB can help. We can help in the sense that we can try to find out if somebody is already trying to do that, if they have technology related to that, if there are smaller players who are actually working on this, or for that matter, larger players who are actually working on this domain. We can find out the exact technology being developed and we can lay it out for you so that you have the answer to this question. Cool. I think there are a few questions that remain unanswered because of lack of time. I will take up those questions and I will individually respond to them after the webinar. And meanwhile, I mean, you already have our email IDs through the invitation link that we sent. We are going to share the recording of the webinar also so that if you have missed any points, you can easily go through them through the recording. And if you have additional questions or scenarios that you want to run by us, I can do that. Simply shoot an email on to the ID that you got an invitation from. It's vikas.jha@greyb.com. You'll have that in your inbox. You can simply reply to that. Meanwhile, I think to conclude this webinar, the central message that I have is that there are a lot of questions that may come up in your mind when you are working in the cannabis space, when you are trying to secure a foot in this domain. And all these questions will have a common problem. And asking the right questions and trying to answer them is the way I have seen a lot of people go about it. But many times the answer is right in front of you. Simply by doing some secondary research, we can easily find out answers. And for others, other situations, there is always GreyB to help. So thank you very much, everybody. It has been a pleasure speaking to you, and you will soon have the webinar video in your inboxes if you have registered for this. Have a good day.
Have a good day, guys.
Thank you.